Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending where you are. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Haskayne Hour. I am Yrjö Koskinen, Associate Dean Research at Haskayne School of Business. We are pleased to have this edition of Haskayne Hour in conjunction with University of Calgary's Alumni Month. This is just one of the more than 25 virtual programs being held throughout September. As a reminder, in Haskayne Hour, we pair Haskayne faculty with practical experts to provide you with unique insights for your business. Today, we are online in Calgary, which is located on the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, the Paikani, the Kainai First Nations, as well as Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation Alberta Region 3. I'm looking forward to a lively discussion today. As our moderator, we are delighted to have Cara Wolf. Cara is founder and CEO of Amolite Analytics, specializing in cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and customized technology production for global companies and governments. We are pleased to be able to claim Cara as one of our own. She's a double Haskayne alumna, which is actually very remarkable. She earned her BCom with us in 1997 and completed her Haskayne MBA in 2005. Cara founded 2 companies during her studies at Haskayne. So if there are any current students listening, you don't have to actually found 2 companies. Just please found 1 company while you're still a student, and we'll be in great shape. Cara was the distinguished graduate in 2019. She currently serves on the advisory boards of the Hunter Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation and the Hunter Hub for Entrepreneurial Thinking. Well, thank you for joining us, Cara. Cara, now it's showtime.
Well, thank you very much for the warm introduction, Yrjö. It's always a pleasure to be here. I'm so excited about the topic and about our extraordinary speakers that we have. We're going to have a lot of fun in this next hour. We're very fortunate to have Dr. Ray Patterson and Mr. Gary Kovacs join us. Dr. Patterson holds the Haskayne Research Professorship in Business Technology Management, and he has published extensively in premier academic journals such as MIS Quarterly and Information Systems Research, among many more. His research interests include quantitative decisions and artificial intelligence. He says he's started researching this area long before it was cool. So today we are going to delve into his research on fake news detection and data privacy. Mr. Gary Kovacs is joining us today from his home in the Bay Area. He has more than 25 years of enterprise software, mobile technology development, and leadership experience. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Excella, and he's also served as a CEO at AVG Technologies and Mozilla, where he directed the development of Firefox, and we've all heard of Firefox. Gary has deep roots in Calgary. He completed 2 degrees at the Haskayne School of Business as well, so he's definitely one of us. His BCom was completed in 1990 and his MBA in 1999. In 2013, Gary received the U Calgary Distinguished Alumni Award for Lifetime Achievement. And I'm very excited to hear his views coming up shortly. Welcome, Gary. Over the past few days, Gary, Ray, and I have had the opportunity to get to know each other better, and we've had a lot of fun prepping for this session today. We've had shared some laughs, some chirps, some jokes, and it's our intention to keep this conversation lighthearted and as engaging as you would like it to be. We're looking forward to engaging with the audience and having you join in the conversation. So as such, we have the Q&A open. So we encourage you to type in your questions at any time and throughout the session. We'll pause for 3 times and answer your questions. So keep them coming, please, throughout the session. We'll give you the opportunity to upvote, and we will endeavor to answer as many questions as we can during the time that we have together. So without further ado, and to get started, I'm going to pass it over to Ray. Ray, take it away.
Well, thank you, Cara. And today, one of the topics that we are chatting about is fake news. And we had conducted a lot of research on this topic in the last few years. And with respect to fake news, we've created an AI algorithm that has over 95% accuracy to detect both real news and fake news. But in the process of our research, we've done a few papers on this now, and some interesting facts have come to light. So one of the interesting tidbits is that when you put on a do not track request, so you say, please do not track me, and that's an informal request. It's not enforced by law, but amazingly enough, when you say, please do not track, of the top news websites, over 40% track you more when you say, please do not track. And this is a very hard to regulate area. So in another one of our upcoming research articles that we are working on, we looked at the California Consumer Privacy Act. And we were able to model that and then look and see what actually happened when that came into play on January 1 of this year. And after about 10 days, we noticed that the number of third parties in the ecosystem that, in that study, we looked at the top 100,000 websites, and they actually increased relative to other non-regulated websites and in other jurisdictions over that time period. So it actually turns out that very hard to regulate, and sometimes when you start to regulate, the reaction by industry is to actually track consumers more, not less. And so that brings us to part of our research, which was on the third-party corporate surveillance ecosystem. And we found that this was, it's basically ubiquitous in terms of online user tracking. It's massively intrusive in terms of personal privacy, and it is largely, as I said, unregulated. Websites are only constrained, from what we could find, by what the market will bear. And there's very little transparency to help users make these informed decisions. It's the wild, wild west, and there's no sheriff in town.
Hey, thanks, Ray. Hello, Canada. I just can't stop myself from saying that. And good to be joining you with no ash in the air from all the California fires and no mask because I'm alone in my home. So, but it does look like a good day out there. Any case, this whole area drives me nuts. When I was at Mozilla and CEO and chairman, we tried to take a stand because we were not for profit. And the stand happened because my daughter at the time, who was 7 or 8 years ago, was 9. And by the way, that doesn't mean I don't know how old she is. Okay, 7 or 8 years. I'm trying to think about when Mozilla was. So before you jump on it, I do know my daughter is somewhere between 14 and 18. So all of that said, she was getting pop-up ads on this Disney game she was playing. And it pissed me off. I said, why is this happening? And then somebody said to me, well, you're CEO of Mozilla and you have 550 million users around the world. What are you going to do? And it struck me that privacy has become the currency it costs us to get on the free web. And what also struck me was the first 10 years of the web, the design point was not that all this could happen, but there was no design point. The design points were largely technical to enable load balancing and that it would never go down, and that if any world catastrophic event, timely, came about, we'd still be able to communicate and share information. And then it blossomed into something that really changed society. And in that, of course, when we change society, we all look for opportunities to make money. Economics works. And in this process, what realized is that pay for play, all these paywalls that first came up, was not an option that people wanted. So it became for free, but you have to fund it. And this is how it all started. So at Mozilla, we, three of us, actually coded this thing at the time called Collusion, now called Lightbeam, that you could put in your Firefox browser that would show you who's tracking you. And that's what Ray was talking about. And then the whole do not track initiative became a switch that you could turn that would send a signal to whoever's providing the content that you happen to be looking at or whatever you're immersing in. And it turned out that that signal actually signaled, I've got something I'm worried about. So that's what led to this increase. So all of this happened, and the web itself turned into something that none of us anticipated, but we also weren't told. We weren't brought along for the ride. So most of us today get on the web, we do our thing, and we don't really think about what's happening, except when something enormous comes along, like a data breach or a visa hack or something of that nature, which of course is post facto. So here we are. And what does all this mean? So it turns out that a couple of truisms hold. Number one is we all react much more to things that are sharp, things that are controversial, things that are inflammatory than we do to nice, comfortable, safe, honest things, news, games, whatever it happens to be. This has given rise to this whole fake news thing and the opportunity for people to shape our opinion, to shape our actions, to push our behavior into ways that we were not anticipating, moment by moment, step by step. And this whole fake news thing, although, I mean, it's popularized and in some ways defined by the United States current president, but it's used as a tool to sort of discount anything that might be coming that they don't like. But it's actually not quite that way. I'd say about 70% of the posted content on the web that doesn't come from consumers or individuals is made by content factories. And those are not independent. Somebody has to pay for those content factories, and they write these articles to kind of shape opinion, and they write them in the thousands because hits and likes and all these other things create momentum, and that's what matters. So that's problem number one. And fake news, and somebody popped up a question of what is the definition of fake news? It's a very broad definition, and it's kind of anything whoever is saying it wants it to be. But in generally speaking, fake news is something that's not, I wouldn't say real or true, because those itself are obtuse words and lack definition by the very fact that true to me might be different than true to you. And true can be opinion rather than actual strict definition that's agreed. But fake news is anything that's not at least cited or referenced to some sort of research or fact that can help inform you where the essence of whatever is being posted comes from. And so I don't know that fake is the right word, but it's not substantiated news or not substantiated content. And 70% is fake news. So that's problem number one. It's meant to move our behavior. And then second, of course, is economic or intrusions or people stealing things from us, such as social security numbers and all the rest of it. So we put all that together, and now we have a web that, as Jim said, is the Wild West. There's no sheriff. It's not regulated. It's impossible, and I think will never be for, well, not never, but it'll be a long, long time before there's a set of regulations for the internet that are enforceable, but rather guidelines should be developed. And so moving from whenever it was that we posted do not track, and I must admit I have a hand in the California Consumer Privacy Act with Kamala Harris and a team of about 10 of us kind of shaped what that's going to be, as well as the EU Privacy Directive that at the time was led by Angela Merkel. And so we shaped it and had a hand in actually authoring part of it, but it isn't being played out as intended. It's not because it missed the mark, it's because when it goes into the political machine, two sides of debate have to settle on a middle ground. And a middle ground in anything sometimes is not what's intended. So you've got parts of it that were removed, parts of it that are not enforced, parts of it that can't be enforced, parts of it that were compromises. And so you get this mishmash of stuff. So that's all that is kind of going on the web. And so at the start of this, I just wanted to kind of set the context for how and why this is happening, what the original intent of is, and then later we'll get into a lot more discussion about what, because that's where when we talked as a panel prior to this call, we're gonna, so what do we do about it? So there's the setup. I hope I didn't bore you too much, but there we have it.
No, that's wonderful. Thanks, Gary. I really appreciate your insight and input, and clearly you're an expert on this topic and have been for many, many years. And I think we've seen a lot of growth from behavioral tracking back in the very early days with Nielsen Rating putting trackers on our television through to product placement, and now online. And as Ray said, it is quite a bit like the Wild Wild West. And Ray, I just have a quick question for you. So from your perspective, how do you define fake news, and is it different from a researcher perspective, as opposed to Gary's perspective, or do you define it in the same manner? Is it real to some, fake to others, or is there some clear, reliable definition that you have come up with?
Yes, thank you, Cara. Sherry, if I could ask you to pull up the slide deck with the first slide, that might help. And while we're spooling that up,
Did you say spooling that up?
I did say that. Is that a wrong term?
No, it's.
Is that an old term?
It's just maybe a little bit, maybe a smidge. Most digital flash memory doesn't spool anymore, but I use the same term. Anyway, sorry to digress.
Sorry about that. No, if we could go to the next slide, please. So when most people think of fake news, they think of a chart such as this. So this chart is from Adfonts Media, and it depicts media bias. And that is not what we were studying. So you can see in this chart that on the bottom, there's bias from left to right. And then you have reliability from low to high on the y-axis. And the bias is typically related to low reliability. We took, for our study, we took the Harvard Library list of fake news and clickbait websites as our list of what was defined to be as fake. I mean, interestingly enough, in our study, we included Fox News as real. But you'll see from this slide that it's fairly down low and on the right. Fascinatingly enough. And but in any event, the point of our research is that all the third parties form a digital supply chain, and this third-party digital supply chain does a lot of things for you when you're on the internet. So you have functionality, you have performance, you have advertising, and these are not all bad things, and they do a lot of good things, such as logins and things like that. And the idea was that we could actually look at the supply chain and ask the following question: does the supply chain differ between a real news site versus a fake news site or clickbait site? And in fact, you are able to discern those differences. Now, you can't discern them with the naked eye, so we had to use artificial intelligence and other heuristics to get the results that we got, which was over 95% accuracy for both detecting fake and real. Our new research is looking at fakeness in general. There's lots of fake websites that are not just news, but they are related to fake products or trying to steal your money on the internet. And,
so Ray,
yeah.
What do you know, how do we know? How do we know if the news is fake, or if someone's gonna steal our money, or if it's disingenuous? What are some of the things that we can do that would maybe give us a level of comfort that what we're looking at is legitimate?
Well, in terms of news sites, let's restrict this just to news for a moment. I strongly believe in the press, in legitimate press. So you can see on this slide, there's a lot of press that's in the top middle. And so my first recommendation is go ahead and get a subscription to not only these, but also the local news sources such as the Calgary Herald. Support legitimate news outlets. There are things that you can do in terms of information hygiene. Once you land on some provocative thing on Twitter or Facebook, there are some information hygiene techniques that you can, as an individual, perform. And Gary was alluding to this, and I'll let Gary take the ball on this, but basically, don't pass things on, know what the source is, and be a very skeptical reader of things where you don't know the source. And Gary, I'll let you tee off on that, because I know you've got a lot of great things to say about that.
Yeah. So from Mozilla, I went and was CEO of a security company, and we had privacy products, and we got quite big and went public and so forth, which then moved us away from doing the good work of society and rather be one of these money-grubbing, shareholder return optimizing companies. But in this process, we never stopped our research. And we did a lot of research on human behavior. And the human behavior is really quite phenomenal. And this gets into what I said at the very beginning, which is the first 10 to 15 years of the internet, maybe 20, it just grew, and it was lovely, and it was an eye-opening experience for all of us. It changed business models. It allowed people in different parts of the world to communicate. It broke down the barriers of government. It broke down anything that had a strength based on secrecy or privacy. And I formed a couple of beliefs. Number one, which also helps run companies, but also live life, about 99% of everything is actually not confidential. So you get into these companies and say, well, we can't tell you that. It's confidential. So, well, why not? And what actually, and the reason why I'm saying this is that because it suggests that these beliefs are only founded in historical beliefs. So you get beliefs on top of beliefs. And if you think about it, even in running a public company that we're on New York, there wasn't much that was really confidential. We just made it so because we thought it needed to be that way. So you got forward-looking earnings, you've got some of the strategic things you do, you have some salary information. But today, through a lot of these websites, not even that's confidential. And so why is that? And these perceptions we grew up with over the internet over 20 years, what we found was a couple of things. We carried those forward. So when and that's a really important thing, because this gets to what you were just saying, in that we have to change our behaviors. But as you baloney slice your way day by day, something that starts out good but turns to have other intent in certain cases, we don't actually perceive that change because it's happening so gradual right in front of us. And so there are moments in time, and this currently is likely to be one of them in society and some of the things that are going on, where we have got to pause and really question the origination, what's behind a lot of the things we think. And so among all the research, the most fascinating points were an overwhelming majority, and it's up above 75%, think Twitter is fact. and when you say it, everybody laughs because no way, come on. But actually, Twitter is fact. And if you look at retweets of anything, largely it's like, way to go, couldn't agree more. And if you get 10,000 retweets that people say couldn't agree more and absolutely agree, then you're the 10,001st person to look at it. You're like, oh, well, I must think the same thing, or else what am I missing? So fact starts to take on a different word, or different meaning, pardon me. And so many people, since the TED Talk that I did, we had an opportunity to outline the problem. But then we get to the question of, okay, well, what's the solution? And we looked at regulations, we've looked at technology, we've spent a lot of time on some of these European Privacy Directive and Do Not Track and CCPA, and some of the work that started in Canada and somehow just trailed off. And those were all promising for about a week, and then you realize it's really not enforceable. even the right to be forgotten in Europe is largely not enforceable because it started in Germany. It's a legislative, well, they don't call it a law, they call it something different, but anyway, it's allegedly enforceable. But okay, your data, if I put in some pictures of my children in Germany, they don't actually live in Germany. They could live on a server anywhere. And then you've got dissemination of information laws, you've got privacy laws, you've got intercountry and intercontinental transaction laws. And I mean, who got what? So that's a dead end largely for the time being. And so what happens is you have to put it back on you and us, you and me, all of us individually. And what we're finding is that's a function of education. So people take what they read as fact. And darn it, I mean, I even look at this, and the example that I use a lot is Breitbart. And I don't even know what Breitbart was or what it existed. And for those that you don't know, that was largely a platform that our current president of the United States used to propagate whatever he wanted to. It was run by some people that may now be imprisoned. And, but we never even heard of it. And then all of a sudden, everybody was forwarding articles from Breitbart. And, you know, nobody really questioned the authenticity of it. And yet, when we look back and read stuff like this, we're like, oh gosh, that just triggers something not real to me. And so we have to educate ourselves to actually think. That's point number one. Like really, really think. And it doesn't have to be an academic exercise, it doesn't have to be long, but if it doesn't ring true, find another source, Google it, search it on some other search engine, you know, figure out, read a little bit more before you start to put your name and velocity behind it. And I'm going to pause there because there are so many things that we can do, but it all comes back to up here. And I use this phrase in these presentations I used to do to high schools, and I stopped just because they were so much demand for it, which means the problem is fairly acute, is you can't outsource your thinking. And the internet, just like a calculator, you know, I used to be able to do math in my head like a whip, and then I got a calculator, and now 4 + 5 could mean, I don't know, like, and because you got to type it in. You see the kids today, they don't even want to learn math because it's all done for them. But it outsources our thinking. It allows us to forget that there's logic behind everything we do and everything we read, and it's really fascinating to understand that logic, and it's needed. So that's point number one. I'm going to pause before I wax on too far here, but that really is point number one. That's the only thing that's going to take it forward at this stage.
So Gary, the answer to your question is it's 9, 4 + 5.
But that's in the metric system. So don't, you're not going to fool me with this conversion thing again.
Now, I wanted to tee off on something that you said, or alluded to, which was the complexity of this entire advertising ecosystem. And Sherry, is it possible that we could get the next slide up for just a moment?
Yeah, this is a great slide, Ray. By the way, if you haven't read, just while it's spooling up, when we first discussed doing this, I got to read not a lot, but some, because it's voluminous, some of the work that you have done, and everybody should just read it. It's pretty interesting.
Well, thank you. I want to give you a big shout out, Gary, because we stood on your shoulders to do that work. It was your light beam, which originally we used. So thank you, Gary, for leading the.
You're welcome.
The digital advertising technology landscape is just complex. There are, as you can see on this slide, there are there are just hundreds and thousands of players and lots of different roles. And this is one of the things that makes regulation difficult. If there was only one player and one role in this system, it would be easy. But there are thousands and many, many different roles. So it just speaks to the sheer complexity of, and I think this slide deck is actually overly simplified, but anyone dealing with in this space, I think would agree that it's an extremely complex system. And I would turn it over to Gary to.
Actually, I've got some questions here. I've got questions from the audience that I would love to hear your input on. And it's going along the same veins, but we seem to have a lot of interest here about the news channels and the different types of programming. So we've got news programs and we've got opinion programs. In your line of work or with what you see, are you separating the two? You know, what do you think is the difference between opinions or, you know, blatant conspiracy theories and blatant, you know, blatant articles that are designed to,
Right.
yeah. So I'll hand that over to you first, Ray, and then Gary. I'd like your views on that.
Okay, so there are two general types of detecting whether there's a problem. Well, the first and the primary one that's always been used is content detection. So you look at the content itself and try to look at there's a lot of work that's been done in this area. And you try to figure out, okay, based on the way it's phrased, based on how it's said, is it likely to be true or false or misleading? And when we first started looking at this problem, we thought that, okay, that's a bit of a fool's errand. You know, we're not going to make any contribution on that space. But what we realized was that the supply chain, that is the digital supply chain, which we now can see because of tools like the one that Gary created when he was at Firefox. Those tools allow us to actually pierce that veil and see the digital supply chain. And then the question becomes very different. It's not whether or not can I detect whether this particular piece of information is incorrect, although that's helpful. You can add that piece of information to what we did. Our question became, can I look at this website generally and say, based on who they run with, who their suppliers are in this ecosystem, do they fall into a pattern of fraudulent behavior of other people who are also fraudulent? So the analogy that I give, I'll do it very quickly, but it's, we've all seen Breaking Bad on that show, Breaking Bad, and Better Call Saul is a spinoff. Saul is a lawyer for all the drug runners on Breaking Bad. Now, if you had the client list for Saul, you would probably be going a long way toward figuring out who the bad players were in Saul's realm. And that's all we really did, is that we were able to get a hold of the client list for the bad players because we could pierce this veil and see who was supplying to who. And, you know, everybody buys toilet paper from Costco, so that's not informative. The fact that you buy toilet paper from Costco is irrelevant. But if, you know, there are, in this area, there are sins of omission and sins of commission. So if you're a bad player and you're not playing with some of the good guys, that's a signal as well as if you're a good player and you're not playing with some of the bad guys. That's also a signal. And that's where the AI and the machine learning comes into play, because you can't detect that stuff with your naked eye.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Ray. I'm going to throw this over to Gary now and get your views on the question, Gary.
Yeah. So news and opinion. I understand the question. I think that probably wasn't the essence of what was really being sought after here. And as in so many cases, the challenge lies not, you know, in the plus or minus 1 or 2 standard deviations of the definition. The challenge lies at the endpoints. And what I mean by that is, if I say 3 people walked into a 7-Eleven on 17th Avenue and held it up and it lasted for 11 minutes and they got $10,000, that's fact. But that's never, I mean, never how it's communicated. It's communicated as, there was an armed robbery in a neighborhood that's seen 5 armed robberies over the last 4 years and seems to have impacted who's now moving into that neighborhood. You know, there's just a whole lot of stuff put around a nugget of fact. Now, there was an armed robbery, that's the fact, but how do you decipher the actual fact from the opinion? Or here's, you know, the ash was coming down and the red skies looked like an apocalypse. Okay, so is the fact that we're having an apocalypse, geez, I better get my shit together? Or is the fact that there's ash coming down and I gotta go clean my car? Or whatever it happens to be. And that has become what grabs attention, which is how what I was saying earlier matters about the internet. And the only person that can sort that out at this point is you and me. Now, we may love to have sensationalized facts. You know, some call them stylized facts. I think an advisor to President Trump calls them alternative facts. You know, whatever it happens to be, we sort it out, which makes the problem that Ray was discussing very difficult. When we first tried to address the essence of a source, there was a lot more sources of information. It might have been a police channel that was pulled off and it was just reported, but it might have been other. And you can today that's a solvable problem. And one of the things that I spent a fair bit of time with was trying to map the human brain, this active ontology that we call our brain, and these ontologies morph over time as we get understanding of the patterns that things happen repeatedly over. And you can build enough of a corpus where you can actually start to predict and therefore shorten the amount of time from context, from truth. And there's hope there. That's largely an AI problem. That business ended up selling to Salesforce long before it ever materialized. So, but the challenge with that is it's easily it's time bound. So behaviors and patterns today are not behaviors and patterns that we repeat a week from now. Lots of influences, and that's a much bigger discussion. But so in understanding news from fact, the nugget is whatever you want it to hear. And so the point I'm trying to make on this is, I don't think the distinction between news and opinion really matters that much, because I don't think we as society really care about the hardcore news unless it's horrible and directly affects us. What we care about is the context and what it means for us. And therefore, by very, very definition, as we take news and interpret it, then it becomes opinion. And so how do we sort through that? And which is a much broader problem. So I don't know, I hope that answered or provided some light on the question.
It does, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think that that you're spot on about the context and seeking alternative different sources of information to try to get your bearings and what it means to you.
Hey, sorry, Cara, one thing just to add to this, and I'll be really brief here to the degree I can, but the context is very different for each one of us. So the hope in solving this problem is we behave in very consistent manners, generally speaking, over long periods of time. But it's very different than how you behave and how I behave and how Ray behaves and all the rest of it. And so there are ways in whatever platform we're using to view or to consume or to engage with content or games that can learn us. And there's a lot of work being done in this area here. And then when something's out of context, it'll alert us and it'll pop up a flag that, hey, you might want to be thoughtful about this. It might not be hurtful, but you might want to be thoughtful. One of the examples, although it's very rudimentary, and I spent a fair bit of time also with their volunteer team on the visa fraud detection system, just because your context, as a very simple example, is where you go. If I go to a gas station and then country club and a couple of restaurants in these certain areas, and all of a sudden now I'm in Brandon, Manitoba at a used car parts dealer, probably there's something going on there. So there are ways to solve it, and what we're finding is it's actually a lot simpler than we thought it was, because we have all been on the internet for a lot longer now. So that's the hope.
So where do you think that market regulation is going to come into play? There's a lot of talk about government intervention and policy. So what are your thoughts? And is there any way for consumers to see how companies are tracking you and to find out what they know about you?
So government regulation can happen and is happening to some degree in truth and source. And what I mean by that is, you have to define yourself as a business or an entity publishing, but it doesn't go for consumers, so there's lots of ways around it. But this is not a news outlet. This is a news outlet. You can look at that now. It's hard to get to. You have to scroll through a lot of stuff. But or this is an opinion outlet, or this is an opinion piece. And so regulations at a government level, so probably regional, the US and Canada and parts of Europe, on where and what is behind, but it's not going to make a comment on the article or on the specific thing, but it's going to be truth and source. Of course, that falls apart when you get bad actors, China, Russia, or whomever that doesn't regulate or doesn't. But over time, the consumer behavior will demand that, and that'll change kind of that opinion. So that's one area. And Ray, I know you've got other thoughts on this.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts, Ray. So what do you think?
Well, lots of thoughts. So first of all, on the topic of fraudulent websites, I see there's a question in here that sort of relates to all this, and let me try to tie it all together. But the question is, can we use AI to find out who the fake companies are? In other words, is there a notion that fraudulent websites in general are, do they have a different supply chain of the third parties? And that's one of the active questions that we have on the table right now. And our preliminary analysis says yes, that fraudulent websites may in fact have different supply chain structures compared to the others. And a second question is just violating trust in general. And there's, a lot of the top websites, amazingly enough, actually hide how much they're sharing. They actively, obfuscate it. And that violation of trust is something that we're very, very, very interested in. And we've got an active research project on that as well. A third area is price discrimination, which is a little more far-flung, but the question is, the result of all of these systems is a marketer's dream. If I could create price discrimination and give everybody a different price for every single product that I have, that's the holy grail for many marketers. And we're looking at whether or not, what are the circumstances of that price discrimination and how does that affect society? It really comes down to the impact of AI, because at that point you're looking at, the only way you can do that is with AI. And it could be on many dimensions. We saw in the, with Cambridge Analytica, they were doing it on emotional dimensions to sway political campaigns and elections. So it's kind of fascinating.
It's totally fascinating, and the implications of the future is quite enormous. I'm really interested about the price discrimination and seeing what will happen with the marketers based on the behavioral tracking that they do. I think, to your point, we're going to see more of an increase in that as we move forward. I know when we were speaking previously, we were talking a little bit about what the safest websites were in terms of not tracking your personal information. And I was surprised at your answer, and I think maybe our audience would be too. So maybe we want to talk a little bit more about the safety in websites and what kind of websites track your information maybe more or less than others.
Well, it really brings us back to the crux of the first article that we did. And the question was that, okay, we were recognizing, along with Gary, that there isn't a lot of regulation that's effective. But the question that we asked, does personal privacy concern actually mitigate or tamper or tamp down the, does it make some websites behave? Whereas, let's take a hypothetical, which is actually not hypothetical because we saw it in the data. News and kids and teens, those websites shared a lot. And I was shocked at and Gary alluded to this earlier, the amount of sharing that goes on in kids and teens websites is excessive. It's very high. But our hypothesis was that news sites, kids and teens, other sites where you just don't care or the person that's there doesn't care, there's no control from the consumer side. They're not going to leave. On the flip side of that hypothesis, we thought, well, what about sites such as healthcare, which can be very sensitive? Or adult websites could be very sensitive if people found out your viewing habits. So the hypothesis was that, well, would we see any difference between news, kids and teens, and these other very sensitive sites such as healthcare? And the answer is yes. the healthcare and the other very sensitive sites were actually fairly safe in terms of the third-party sharing. But news, kids and teens, it was Katie bar the door. So,
Gary, what are your thoughts? Like, what can we do as consumers to protect our privacy? Are there tools that are out there? Is there a way we can get an understanding of what people are tracking about our behavior? Are there things that you use?
Yeah, there are. So just the way this started for me was this collusion or this light beam that we put into the Firefox browser. When I came back after a couple hours away, my daughter was on a Disney game on the Mac that was sitting on just in the common area in the house. And my colleague phone said, hey, like, did you hit light beam and see, or collusion at the time, and see what happened? And this thing grew like an amoeba. And within a 2-hour period of a 9-year-old girl, she's 145 sites were tracking her. And one of the biggest was Disney. And what we did through looking at what they did, how they placed things on her browser, they were selling and buying information about her, and then within about a couple minutes, they had a big file on sort of what the profile of this person is. So you shouldn't assume that there's any safe websites from a pure privacy point of view. But listen, there's a lot written about privacy and the doom and gloom of the internet. The internet's a spectacularly amazing thing, and most of our privacy, most of us will not have an issue, but we got to start thinking. And you know, the number one tool that's free to download, in fact, it comes with most people from birth, is your brain. Like literally start thinking about the stuff that you're doing. And the second thing, and this goes for any age, is everything lives forever on the internet, no matter what you think. I've used this example for high school kids where I've just gone in and taken a name and I go on to all these. I won't get into where they are because then everybody sends me what's the URL, but you can figure them out. And in the dark web, shit lives forever, ever. And you know, there's pictures, there's comments, and they're formed in ways that you didn't intend to create a profile of you. And in the wrong hands, they can make any one of us look either really good or really bad. And that's why you have a pop-up of all these reputation issues online. And so you really got to think, and the rule of thumb that I always tell people is if you wouldn't take it, whether it's written word or a picture, family, people send body shot. I'm like, what are you doing? And post it on a bunch of billboard sites in your neighborhood or telephone poles or whatever, then don't put it online. Like, in fact, it is worse putting it online. But there's this thing of we click it, it's gone. We think, it's gone. I don't have to walk by this telephone pole and look at, you know, a picture of my naked dog. And therefore it's all safe. But if you post it online, it's there forever. And I guarantee you I can find it. And so that's the biggest rule. And then the third thing is, you've got to interpret things for yourself, and there's so many ways to check. And a lot of these sites are trying to move our behavior. All that's good. It's fun. I love opinion. You know, I take 10 opinions and I form my own opinion. So I wouldn't worry about it too much, but you really got to think. There are tools. There's lots of them. We can provide a link, and you know, that can help you track malicious websites that are putting different things on to track you in nefarious ways, and you got to be careful. But those are the big three things for sure.
Well,
but
thanks.
But even trying to, if I can add just something.
Sure.
But even trying to go through the disclosures on whether it's EU or GDPR or the CCPA, it's very, even for myself, it's hard to figure out, okay, which end is up on, you know. So we looked at the actual disclosures and then the actual behavior of the websites, and they're different. It's not to say that they don't touch all the bases and are doing something wrong. It's that they may have several hundred third parties that they're dealing with, that and I may only touch 70 or 80 of those on any given interaction. But if I come in and I'm someone else, or portray myself as someone else, or if I have a do not track turned on, I get a different set of, I get a different experience. from many of the websites. So my experience that I get is different from the experience that Gary gets and that you get, Cara. And every time you interact with a website, you touch them, we're talking about the first 2 to 3 seconds that, dozens and dozens of connections are made, and your information is shared instantaneously, and there's a log of it. And I think one of the more ubiquitous tracking mechanisms is the Facebook pixel. It is hidden, but it is ubiquitous. I mean, there's a lot of websites that employ it. And then who do you think is collecting that notification of everywhere that I touch? It's Facebook.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the role of AI and how that plays.
Okay. So AI is, all of this, the data, to me, it's a stack. So you have, the data at the bottom, and then at the top you have the AI, and you can't do one without the other. So like the data is worthless unless you can process it, and the AI, essentially what the AI tools are a little more advanced statistical methods. So they're non-parametric, non-linear statistical analysis, essentially, is what they are at the heart of them. And so it's not that much different from statistical analysis. And you can't do all of this stuff without these tools. Of course, we've had an explosion in the capability of the tools and the data processing to back them up. So it's part and parcel. And
jump in, Gary.
AI is in use today broadly across the internet for lots of different things. AI in many different forms. AI will develop, it'll get more sophisticated. Previously, it was largely restricted to some degree by processing power. Now through all node transmission and lots of different techniques, we are able to get past that. So now but it's largely used to determine now inbound threats and how threats can happen and some of the things that are going on. And it's pretty effective in many degrees for that. What it's not effective yet, and it's not really in place to do, is at an individual level. And so what's the threat to me? Because you may have a different threat threshold than I do, or you may think something's a threat, I might think I want that. And so that now gets to blend kind of the human preference and what is perceived by general set of rules as a threat or some other compromise. And it's there that I think something I'm calling individual tuning. So it's going to be just an agent that sits for us and determines where we go and how we go and what we do. And that agent technology can be developed, and then it has to be incorporated into your world in a life and in a way that understands what you do over some protracted period of time, and it'll get more intelligent as it is. And I think that's really the future, whether that's in a software online or whether that's an agent that sits on a device or in a browser or something. I mean, there's many instantiations of this, but really that's, my gardeners are.
I know, we saw that.
We saw that.
Everything gets real right now, everybody.
Welcome to the world of Zoom.
Hey, trim that.
So hey guys, we gotta wrap this up. It's gone by very quickly, and it's a lot of fun and really enlightening. So I'll throw it over to you, Ray, for a quick final comment, and then Gary for very, very quick. We've got like 2-3 minutes left. So
I got it.
Final comments. Go ahead.
Well, I would like to give a shout out to our data science and business analytics programs. In the last 5 years, we've started several programs at all levels. And so if you're interested in these sorts of things, I would encourage people to check out what the University of Calgary is offering.
Great.
So very, very quick, you guys, thank you for including me. First of all, thanks to Ray and Karen Pollard and you, Cara, for putting it together. And everybody, I wouldn't be afraid of anything. I just think we all got to think a little bit more as we go on the internet and enjoy. And send money, and I'm going to send you my routing ID and number. And if you don't send it, don't worry, I'll get it. So, but in case.
Gary, that's what our dean is supposed to say. Those things.
Anyway, and
Oh,
Talk
that's
all
awesome.
soon.
But thank you.
So thank you very much. That was really enlightening. Lots of fun. I'm going to send this over now to Yurio for final wrap-up comments. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. This is a fascinating and fun conversation. We'd like to hear from you and your thoughts about today's program. So please provide your feedback in our short poll. We had about 200 participants on the webinar across Canada and beyond, at least from Boston and London. And recording of this program will be available on the Alumni Month website by the end of this week. This is, of course, a very topical issue what we were just discussing. The US presidential election is coming over in a little bit of over 1 month. And there's, of course, already rumors about bad actors like Russia and China spreading fake news. So we have to be very vigilant and thinking about what we can believe and what is fake. So to summarize what we heard today, I mean, and I thought this was absolutely fascinating, is that it is Wild West out there. There is no sheriff in town, and regulation is not effective. So what does it mean? That you have to use your own brain. So critical thinking is more important than ever before. And that's a great task for our universities, including University of Calgary and Haskayne School of Business. We don't just have to teach skills and knowledge for our students. We have to teach them also how to think and what are the critical thinking skills. So like Gary said, don't outsource your thinking. You have to think yourself. We will be hosting our next Haskayne Hour later this fall. So please remember to check your inbox for your invitation to join. And we look forward to another opportunity to pair Haskayne faculty with business people to provide you with unique insights. I would also like to remind you that you will be getting an evaluation survey in your email. Please look for it and send it with your comments to us. And I would really sincerely thank our presenters today, Ray, Gary, and Cara. You did a fantastic job. And thank you to the audience. Thank you for all joining us today. I'm so glad you were able to join us, and I look forward to connecting with you again soon.